week on the Europe Conversation on Euronews, I catch up with French EU Affairs Minister Benjamin Haddad, and I ask him whether Europe can supply security guarantees for Ukraine without a US backstop. He also discusses why France is ready to extend its nuclear guarantees to the rest of Europe. Minister, thank you very much for joining us on the Europe Conversation.
Thanks for having me.
I just want to start off with where we are right now, what your assessment is. President Macron saying that he's willing to extend nuclear deterrent guarantees for the cross of Europe. We also have leaders in Poland and Latvia saying they're going to train men of military age, talking about conscription. I mean, we're really entering a new era.
We have the questions arising from the United States about the future of the transatlantic relationship. And this is a moment for us to take our destiny to our own hands. We've been seeing in the last few years, the last few decades, Europeans sliding behind when it comes to defense, when it comes to tech investment in AI or quantum, when it comes to industry. And this is a moment where we can come together, unite, invest massively into our strategic autonomy through defense.
What is your assessment of what Donald Trump, the actions of the White House in relation to Ukraine, stopping the military intelligence which has been exploited and also stopping weapons?
I think they go against even the interest of the United States. How could it be in the interest of the United States to give a victory to Putin, to show capitulation in Ukraine? What kind of message would that send to China and to other competitors? And if you allow me to take a step back on this, you know, the truth is we've seen a longer-term trend in the last 10, 15 years from the United States. It's President Obama who talked about Europeans being free riders, who did not respect the red line in Syria. It's the first term of President Trump. We already talked about trade conflicts or defense spending. And even under the Biden administration, which in the tone was much more sympathetic, of course, you know, we had the unilateral withdrawal from Afghanistan that was done without coordination with allies like Germany and Britain who were on the ground. We had AUKUS, the submarine crisis with France. And we had the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, a massive protectionist program which amplified everything the Trump administration was doing on protectionism without any coordination with Europeans. So you see these trends of the US focusing on itself, focusing on Asia, protectionist trends, leaving the WTO, for example, at the expense of Europeans. So we need to see the writing on the wall.
But it looks like that the United States hasn't called for Putin or Russia to make any concessions while President Zelensky is expected to sign this minerals deal.
You're completely right. We need to continue to increase the pressure on Russia. No negotiation about the security of Ukraine can be done without Ukrainians, and no negotiation about the security of Europe can be done without Europeans. And Europeans will play a key role in any form of security guarantee in the long run, and this is why we need to be around the table.
But we don't have any guarantee, and it's not likely to be forthcoming in relation to a backstop from the United States. I mean, President Macron had a very cordial meeting with President Trump a short time ago, but nothing substantial emerged from it. Can Europe defend Ukraine so there isn't a Minsk I, Minsk II situation without a backstop from the United States?
This is why we continue our dialogue with the United States on the need for the US to stay committed to the security of Ukraine, because once again, it is not sending a message of force to other competitors in the US if you lead to a situation where Russia can just rearm and re-attack Ukraine. It would be not in the interest, of course, of Europeans and Ukrainians, but not in the interest of the US either.
But can Europe do it? I mean, we're talking about a short time ahead, potentially, because Donald Trump is putting huge pressure on President Zelensky to come to the table. He says that Putin wants to end it. He wants this to be over. He wants to pivot to China and so on. So can Europe do it without a backstop from the United States?
Look, at the very least, I can tell you that this is why President Macron has asked the government, and other European governments are looking at stepping up our support for Ukraine and replacing the support from the United States, because once again, it is the security of Europe that is being played in Ukraine, and stepping up also on security guarantees while keeping our dialogue with the United States.
So potentially looking at Europe doing it without the United States if there has to be?
Without speculating on scenarios in the long run, because we're keeping our dialogue with the United States, because once again, it's our security interest on both sides that's at play. But this is also why you see Europeans stepping up both on the support of Ukraine and in defense of Europe.
And in relation to troops on the ground, would they be potentially deterrent troops, not just peacekeeping troops?
Well, look, the question is, once again, if you have tomorrow a ceasefire, you need to be able to have a force to be able to preserve it, a peacekeeping force, if you will. So this is where Europeans will have to take their responsibility. We are ready to do so. We've already said so with other able and willing partners. You've heard the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom already talk about deployment of a contingent. Of course, not to fight war. We always need to underscore this, but to be able to keep the peace on the ground in the long run. And this is a discussion that's being held right now among allies.
Okay. I want to ask you about that extraordinary offer or announcement by President Macron about France extending its nuclear deterrence throughout Europe. What does this mean exactly? Is that the European Union? Is it the whole of Europe? Is it Ukraine? Is it within NATO?
Of course, the French nuclear deterrent will always stay sovereign in the sovereign decision of the head of state of the French Republic. So it's no question, of course, of sharing the use of the nuclear deterrent, the nuclear button, if you will. With that being said, French presidents, ever since General de Gaulle, actually the founder of the French nuclear deterrent, have always said that French nuclear deterrent is here to protect the vital interest of the French nation, and these vital interests have a European dimension. Of course, when our neighbors and our allies in Europe are attacked, it has an impact on the French vital interest. So what President Macron has said is that he wants to open a conversation with partners who want it. And he said this actually for the last few years, this is not something new, about how the French nuclear deterrent can contribute to the security of European partners. It's been striking to see that the next Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, was actually quite forthcoming in a recent statement saying that he wants to have this conversation. This is something very important to us.
So it could potentially, though, include Ukraine, for example?
I think let's see, where that could go. But at the very least, having this conversation with Germany and other countries in Europe.
And I want to talk to you about defence as well and investment, because obviously that is something that each country is really having to put money in towards and taking out of their exchequer. In France, in particular, you have a very good social system, a very strong social system that's coveted across the world. Where would that money be coming from for all this major investment from France?
There's a few responses to your question. First, about what we can do at the European level. So the European Commission, just on Thursday, announced a series of measures to relax budgetary rules to make it easier for national member states to be able to invest in defense. That's already a major step, and that's something that we had been advocating alongside partners in Europe for a long time. Then a loan from the European Commission, 150 billion euros, to member states when they invest in the capabilities that I was mentioning earlier, where we are lagging. You have the possibility of creating Eurobonds, borrowing money. Look, we did it during the COVID crisis, right? We've benefited from decades from what we call the peace dividends, which basically that we could invest in our domestic politics when the United States was taking care of our security. To be fair, in France, a little less so than elsewhere, because we have our nuclear deterrent and because we have constantly invested in defense. But yes, we will have to make budgetary decisions, and this is the conversation we're having in France right now about how we can increase our defense budget while keeping investors, so not raising taxes, keeping our companies here, keeping investors. Does that mean working more? If you look at the amount of time worked in France compared to other European countries, we're slightly behind.
Is France ready for that discussion? Because we know that domestically, from a political perspective, everybody's quite divided. You have the rise of far-right parties and so on, serious problems getting the budget passed recently.
It will have to be a moment of responsibility for everyone. We see the world around us, and I think the French are very lucid, very conscious about the world that is changing.
Just before I let you go, Minister, just two more questions. First of all, do you think that this decision by President Macron to extend nuclear guarantees to Europe will bring France under the threat of Russia? Because we know the Russians have said that this announcement threatens them. And second of all, one of the things that you've spoken about is the decades of Europeans buying US weapons. And you said you have concerns before that these could become immobilized?
First, I would say, if you allow me to answer quickly your second question, Russia is already a threat to France and to Europe. We see cyber attacks, we see foreign interference, we see Russia going after our interest and influence elsewhere. We see the incredible pressure we've seen on democracies like Romania or Moldova. We see, of course, the aggression against Ukraine. Through Ukraine, we know that Russia is going after the European security architecture, and that it's targeted France also repeatedly. To your question on the industry, it's a very important point because we support the notion of the European preference for funding for our European defense industry. Because the only way to have an autonomous European defense industry is to make sure that you have the control of the technology, so you have the technological know-how. Look at just the debates we had over the long-range missiles sent to Ukraine. If you have American components, and Americans decide that they can't do deep strike to be able to defend themselves against Russian targets, they can control the use, even though the European countries that will want Ukrainians to be able to do so have agreed to it. So there is the question of control of use, there's the question of technology. And I would even say, if you want to make the case also that we need to increase our defense budget in the long run, politically you also need to show that it trickles down in terms of reindustrialization, in terms of factories, in terms of job. Not that it's funding defense factories in Kentucky or Pennsylvania. I think it's a fair point.
Okay, Benjamin Haddad, Minister for European Affairs of France, thank you very much for joining us on the Europe Conversation.
Thank you very much.